Hello, thank you for joining me today. We're going to cover advanced registration forms. This is a way for you to build a custom registration flow entirely within FusionAuth. You might do this if you have special information you need to get from your users. For example, today we're going to build a registration flow for a custom real estate application. We're going to ask for information that would be helpful to someone looking to buy a home, like the minimum and maximum sales price they're looking for. So the first thing to do when you're starting out with advanced registration forms is to make sure that you have a valid FusionAuth license. You can do this after you log into the admin user interface by going to the Reactor tab, and you can check your status of your license. If you don't have a valid FusionAuth license, you can't use advanced registration forms. Luckily, there's a free trial available at the website, so head on over to FusionAuth.io, go to the pricing page, and you'll be able to sign up for a free trial to kick the tires on this functionality. After you've verified that your license is set up correctly, then you can start to build the form. Now, building the form has two parts. The first part, we'll go to the Customizations tab. The first part is to build your form fields, and then the second part is to build your form itself. So when you click on the Fields tab, you can see that we have all these standard fields that are just available to us. And if all you need to do with your registration form is combine these fields in a certain way with a certain number of steps, then you're good. You don't have to create any custom fields. You may, for example, want to ask for someone's email and password on the first screen of the registration flow, and then later ask them for their first name, last name. But for our real estate sample application that we're going to be talking about today, we do have some custom fields that we need to add. So the first thing you need to decide on is a field name. We're going to use the name minimum price, and this is going to be basically the minimum price that this home buyer is looking to buy a home at. Now we can choose which field we want to store this data in. And there are three main places you can store data from a custom registration form. The first is these top kind of 10 or 12 fields. These are fields that are already set up for you by FusionAuth as part of kind of the default schema. And they can either be on the user, like full name, or they can be on the registration, like registration.username. I'll talk a little bit later about what the difference is between the user and the registration. So why might you want to do that? Well, it's conceivable you could have multiple different registration forms for different applications and have the same data that you want to store, but you have different rules around it. So for instance, you might have application A where you require someone to provide their mobile phone number. And you might have application B where it's optional. And then for the users, you want to be able to store the data so that when a third system, system C, goes and grabs the user data, that it knows that it can always look in the mobile phone field and find that information if it exists. So that's the first place that you can store data from a custom registration field. The second place is the user.data field, and this is structured JSON data, so it's key value pairs, kind of a blob that you can just push things into. Anything that can be stored as a JSON string. And this is going to be data that is tied to the user that is custom. So for instance, you might want to put the income of the user in the user data field, because that is going to be tied to the user, and you might have a suite of applications, all of which need to get that data. Now what we're doing is we're saving off the minimum price range, the maximum price range, and the area that the user is interested in. And those are all types of data and values of data that are very tied to the application itself. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put it into the registration data field. Again, similar to the user data field, this is a key value store, and you can put whatever you want in there. But where this is different is that a registration is the entity within FusionAuth that represents the joining between a user and application. So this is a place to store application-specific information, and the data field on that object, on the registration object, is the right place to put these custom fields which are specific to this application. So when we select that, you can see that we're able to add our own field name, and we're going to call that min price. The next thing we can do is control how this field is displayed to the end user in the registration flow. So this would be a text field typically, but you can choose any of these other fields that you want, and this is going to generate the HTML form control. So in this particular case, we know that min price is going to be a number, so let's go ahead and use that form control. Separately, we can also choose the data type. So you could conceivably have a select box, and have the data type of that value be an email or a number. So in this particular case, because we know this is going to be number, we're going to set both the form control and the data type to be number, but they could be different. And for certain form controls, they have to be different. Right? If you choose a select box, you're going to not be able to choose the data type of select. You're going to have to pick string, number, Boolean. Finally, we have some other kind of metadata type choices to make. Do we want this field to be required or not? Do we want to provide a confirmation form control? And obviously that doesn't really matter for the minimum price, but if you are taking in some sensitive information, a password, a PIN, something like that, you might want that confirmed value. And finally, we have custom validation. And this basically, as you can see from the help menu, is a regular expression. So we're not going to use validation because we're going to rely on the number data type in the form control, but we are going to require this field because anyone who's registering for this application, really, if they're serious about home buying, they're going to have a minimum price in mind. So let's go ahead and save this field. You can see that it's been added, and we're going to add two more custom fields. The first is maximum price, and we can shortcut some of our decision making by just duplicating this field. And the only things we need to change there are the name that's displayed in the admin interface, which is what that name field is for, and the field ID. And we can save this. All right, let's go ahead and add one more field, and again, this is going to be the geographic area that we're interested in. And for this field, again, we're going to continue to put it in the registration data. And for the form control, I think a text box is probably a really good fit for this. And for data type, we're going to leave it as string as well. But one thing we're not going to do is we're not going to require this because people may have a price range in mind, but they may not want to share the area they're looking in, or they may not know what area they're looking in. We want them to feel free to register without providing that information. Save that off. So we have our three fields in here. Now the next step is to actually create the form. So what forms do is they bring together the fields, and they do that in the form of a series of steps, and each step is an HTML page. And this is all generated for you by FusionAuth. So you need to provide a name, and the type right now is definitely registration, and then we need to add a step. So the first thing we want to do is probably add both steps. We want to have two steps because we want to be able to present the user with one page that's full of kind of typical username, password type of registration details, and then the second page, which is going to be our specific custom information for this application. You can create as many steps as you want, although I would advise you not to create 10 steps because that's going to be a real barrier to conversion for someone to register. Although I guess on the flip side, if they go through 10 steps, they are probably super dedicated to your application. So once we've created a couple of steps, we can now start adding our fields. So for the first step, again, we're going to ask for some more typical fields that someone might expect. All right. And let's go ahead and add phone number 2. All right. And let's go ahead and add our secondary fields. We're going to put, actually, let's start with minimum price. And geographic area. And you can actually see if we decide, well, we want geographic area to be the first item on step 2, we can move it up very easily. So that is it. We've created this form, and again, we can create any number of custom fields and we can put them in any set of steps we want. So let's go ahead and save off this form, and now we're going to configure the application to use the form. So the first thing we need to do actually is we need to make sure that we have a grant enabled, and we need to add a redirect URL. And this basically is where your user is going to end up after they successfully register. I'm going to add the FusionAuth website, but obviously you want it to land maybe on a profile page or maybe at your home page, wherever you want your user who is successfully registered to end up. And then the next thing to do is to make sure we turn on self-service registration, and we want to select the advanced type, and here we're going to select the real estate search registration. So by doing so, we've associated that custom registration form with the Pied Piper application. So we're going to save things off, and now we just need to find the registration URL, which we can do right here. Let's see it right here. Now I'm going to open up an incognito window, because if I don't, then FusionAuth will recognize that I'm already logged in and won't let me register, won't send me to the right page. Here we are. So I can register. Okay, and you can see that it tells me how many steps I have to go through as a user. I can click next, and then it gives me these hints: geographic area, min price, max price. If I try to click register, it's going to tell me that my minimum price and maximum price values are invalid because those are not valid numbers. So let's go ahead and put some values in there, and then okay, let's go ahead and register. And here I am back at the FusionAuth website. That is what my redirect URL was. Let's go ahead and look at the users list, and you can see here I am successfully having registered. If we go to the manage screen, you can see that I have registered for the Pied Piper application and that I have user data, and this is available for viewing via the admin application And then programs that use the APIs can pull that information from this registration object. You'll have noticed during the registration process that it was a little rough. The hints, the placeholders, were not exactly the friendliest. So we can improve that. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new theme, and then we're going to associate that with our tenant, and then we're going to customize that theme in such a way as to improve the user experience from the registration flow standpoint. So the first thing we're going to do actually is close this incognito window. Then we're going to go to customizations and themes. We're going to duplicate the FusionAuth theme. We're going to duplicate the theme. Let's call it real estate application. And the reason we need to duplicate it is because the FusionAuth theme is read-only. So let's go ahead and save this so we can leave the theme as is for right now, and we'll come back and modify it. But in order for the theme to be used, we need to go to the tenant screen, and we're going to change the theme from FusionAuth to the real estate application. Now note that the theme is set at the tenant level as opposed to the registration form, which is set at the application level. So if you have two different applications that have wildly different look and feels or wildly different needs in terms of themes, you're going to need to put them in different tenants. Luckily, FusionAuth allows you unlimited tenants, so it's very easy to do. Just something to be aware of. So let's head back to the theme and customize it. So we're going to customize it in two different ways. And I don't pretend to be a designer, so I'm not going to make this look extremely beautiful, but we're going to improve it to some extent. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to improve those placeholders. And instead of having them be geographic area or registration.data.min price, we're going to actually have it be an intelligent message. So what you're going to do is you're going to edit the messages file. And this is all accessible via the API as well. I'm just going to do it in the admin screen for ease of use. So I'm going to scroll down to right here where it says custom registration forms. And each of these are going to be the field IDs, and then the value is what we're going to display to the user. And these can all be localized too, by the way. So we're going to add in for mobile phone, for first name, and for our custom fields. So let's go ahead and grab that. All right, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to add some validation error messages. So remember when we hit register on the second step and it just showed a red invalid message? We're going to change that to be a little more friendly. And you can see that we have all these other validation messages that we can configure if we want. We just have the type of the validation message and then the key to which it corresponds. And with that, we are done editing the messages portion. So we've basically improved all the placeholders. Now we're going to actually improve the form outside of the placeholders. And if you can remember back to the registration screen, you'll remember that once you started typing in the form field, the placeholder went away, which is as you'd expect. But that means that the user has to remember what the form field represents. So we're going to add some labels to our HTML form to make it a little better looking and to make sure that the user can start typing the form field, go away, get their coffee, come back and still see what that form field was for. The way we're going to do that is we're going to go to the helper section, and this is just a set of FreeMarker macros. Apache FreeMarker is the system that the theming layer is written in. Go all the way to the bottom. All the way to the bottom. And this is the custom field macro. And this is what takes the custom field representation that we created in the form fields section and turns it into HTML. So you can customize this as much as you want. We're going to do a small customization, and we're going to add, as I mentioned, labels that will help the user remember which form field they are filling out. So you can see here that we just take the field key and we're going to output a label before the HTML form element is generated by the subsequent code. Nothing too complicated. And again, this could be localized if you want it. I'm going to save that off. And now we are ready to once again go to our registration URL. And voila, you can see the placeholders are right there. And you can also see that these labels have been added. And because we're using the label HTML element, if you click on the label, it will take you to that form field. So let's go ahead and register. Just so we can see the second screen. Again, gives us those nice messages, and if we try to register, it gives us those good, friendly validation messages that are a lot better than just yelling invalid at our users. And that's it, folks. You have just created, by using the FusionAuth admin panels, a custom registration flow with multiple steps, with both standard fields and custom fields, and improved the user experience by making some changes to the theme to improve the placeholders and to improve the actual registration form itself. Thank you very much for your time today, and happy form building.